When I got yanked into that alley, my parents were hugging the kid they sponsored, happily chatting with a reporter. They said watching her grow up like any other kid was the greatest joy for us as a couple. Everyone lauded their kindness and generosity. Seeing them bask in happiness and fame actually made me happy for them too. If only I wasn't about to be left lying dead in some secluded field. My body felt like a filthy rag, tossed aside by a man. He grabbed my hair and slammed my head into the pavement again and again. Blood quickly filled my eyes, and the searing pain made my body curl and stretch endlessly. With whatever strength I had left, I managed to press the emergency contact button one final time. The guy noticed, and his twisted, manic grin widened. He pinned me down, shoving the phone into my face while mocking me. His foul breath was right at my neck as his rough hands ripped through my coat and reached under my skirt. The call went through, and my mom's strained voice came on the line. "Joe, can you stop causing drama already? Today's the big interview with the Mountain Kids. Lisa's the main focus, and I bought her that new dress. What's your problem?" She snapped. "Lisa's sick. We even had to change the venue. You're so unsympathetic, selfish, and petty, all about a dress." Her complaints totally drowned out my muffled pleas for help. Then a girl's voice chimed in from the other end. "Mrs. Smith, don't scold Joe. She didn't do as well as me in school, and without the interview, it must feel bad." "Lisa, don't defend her. She's spoiled and hasn't faced any hardships," my mom continued. "Mrs. Smith, I don't want you and Joe to have any issues because of me." "Lisa, you're just too considerate." My mom ended the call. The dial tone echoed like a death knell. The man smashed the phone to the ground, the broken pieces crushing any remaining hope I had. My chest burned with hatred. Hatred for ever trusting them, for listing them as my emergency contacts. Hatred knowing that every kid they sponsored mattered more. Yet I still held on to hope for them. The night dragged on painfully, each second feeling like a slow death. At some point, the man grabbed a brick from the roadside. Looking down at my rag doll-like body, he let out a wild laugh. He brought the brick down on my head. Each heavy hit felt like it was tearing through my very being, the metallic taste of blood overwhelming my senses. I was like a stray dog, barely clinging to life. My chest shook and convulsed violently until the brick hit my head a second, then a third time. The night was pitch black, and I couldn't feel pain anymore. Only the cold, bloody tears on my face stung my skin. My soul floated above, watching my barely clothed, bruised, and battered body with blood pouring from my shattered skull. I twisted my lips in a dark amusement. If my parents saw me like this, maybe they'd realize no other kid had it worse than me. Tears welled up again, pulling my soul forcefully towards the hospital. In the hospital room, the reporters had already left. My mother was embracing an 18-year-old girl, just like me, in the prime of her youth. The girl wore a white dress, the same one I'd kept in my cart for months, that my mother never bought for me. I reached out to wipe the bloody tears from my eyes. Just then, my dad walked in with 2 boxes of milk, carefully warming them with hot water before pouring them into cups and bringing them to Lisa. "Drink carefully. It's hot, and you need to eat for that cold and fever," he said. Such strong fatherly love. I used to have that too. But when did my dad stop lovingly feeding me warm milk and medicine? Oh, I remember. The day we first met Lisa, my parents took me to do volunteer work, so I'd understand the world's struggles. Lisa's dad had mental issues, and her mom died early. On the drive over, they kept telling me to be kind and friendly to the girl, not to bully her. At Lisa's house, in the bare room, stood this pale little girl in the center, even wearing sandals in freezing weather. Her look really shook me. I immediately took off my coat to give to her, even though I was cold myself. After returning home, Lisa would write to my mom, her innocent words full of longing for my parents. Each letter was followed by a money transfer from my mom to Lisa. I didn't think much of it back then, even bragging to my friends and classmates about how awesome my parents were. But I noticed things starting to change. My new clothes disappeared because Lisa needed them more, my parents explained. My toys vanished too, as they used the money to buy her school supplies. I cried and acted out, but my dad just accused me of being selfish and lacking compassion. I never understood why Lisa's struggles had to come at my own expense. Until I graduated elementary school, Lisa got into the county's best middle school. Her tragic life story brought attention, and my parents, the kind souls sponsoring her, were praised. Reporters swarmed our house, interviewing my parents, snapping photos, filming videos. My parents became local celebs, getting greeted wherever they went and even receiving extra fruit from vendors. Community workers would occasionally visit to show their gratitude. Thanks to the media buzz, my parents' social media accounts gained 300,000 followers in just a month. Every day, fans showered them with praise for their big-hearted deeds. People hailed their noble character and willingness to help others. In real life and online, my dad and mom were seen as the nicest people. Lisa was truly considerate. To fulfill my parents' wishes, she introduced them to several needy kids from her village. Before long, my folks were covering living and school expenses for nearly every child there. Lisa didn't forget to give back either. She had the kids stand with her on TV, crying and praising my parents' kindness to reporters. Even their county sent my mom and dad several banners of recognition. Wrapped in all this praise, my parents couldn't stop smiling. Even when we had to sell 2 of our 3 homes and could barely afford leafy greens, picking up the leftover veggies the sellers didn't want, they stayed content. This went on until my grandma got sick and needed hospitalization. That's when I found out my dad had spent even her last savings. We couldn't afford treatment, and she passed away. I was furious. Furious! I stormed over to Lisa's village. Do you realize my grandma is gone forever because of you and those kids you brought? Lisa, always so subservient in public, finally showed her true colors, grinning ear to ear. Is it my fault your parents were fools? I slapped her in anger, not knowing it would unleash her vengeance against me. Lisa started getting closer to my parents, promising to take everything away from me. When I got home, my dad slapped me back for hitting Lisa. Joe, why did I raise such a selfish and ungrateful son? Helping those kids was a noble act. Your grandma's death is because she was old. Medicine wouldn't have saved her. How could you be so wicked to hit Lisa? I stared at my dad in disbelief. Did their misery give him the right to pull the plug on my grandma? Lisa then called me like a triumphant peacock. Joe, beg me on your knees and maybe I'll give your parents back to you a little. Remembering all this soured my heart. I felt torn inside. I had a bad headache and felt like I'd forgotten so much. Like my love for my parents, I jumped onto another hospital bed, watching a family of 3 with envy. Just then, a doctor walked in, and my dad stood nervously. Nurse, isn't my daughter just feverish? Why mention what? The doctor glanced at my dad. You should probably talk to her about safe practices. The doctor left, and my parents stood shocked. Lisa, what does the doctor mean by that? How could you have boyfriends? Lisa broke down, hysterically crying and shaking. Auntie, I was forced. Some school bullies pick on smart girls. If I didn't, they'd hit me and lock me in the bathroom. Dad felt a pang and turned to scold my mom. You were too harsh on Lisa. This is school bullying. We need to talk to the school tomorrow. Mom hugged Lisa tight. Why didn't you tell me? I'd have helped. I felt bored, like yawning. Only my parents would believe Lisa's lies. I once passed Lisa's school and saw her smoking, arm in arm with a tattooed guy, bullying a kid with glasses. When I told my mom Lisa was using their money to misbehave, smoking, drinking, having boyfriends, bullying, she didn't believe me. She called me malicious and jealous. Lisa was so sweet and well-behaved. How? She didn't believe me. She called me malicious and jealous. Lisa was so sweet and well-behaved. How could she be the way I described? From that day, my parents trusted Lisa more than me. They thought the kids they funded, despite their tough lives, were much better than me, more diligent and morally upright. And I was just a spoiled liar. I often wondered why I didn't measure up to these strangers, even though I was their own child. Maybe it's because I didn't bring them honor and applause. When Lisa finished her 4-drip, my parents gently took her home. Along the way, Mom suddenly said, should we pick up that little devil on our way back? Her shift's ending. Dad frowned. She's in a bar instead of studying. I'd rather break her legs than pick her up. Lisa flicked her lips. It's okay, Mr. Smith. Joe's gotten curious. She'll grow out of it. Lisa's words made my parents beam with pride. Mom playfully tapped Lisa on the nose. You're a clever one. Wish Joe was as sensible as... I was super excited when I saw the three heading towards my bar job. After my exams, I worked there to save for college. Despite its shady nature, it paid well. My parents' money was for the kids they sponsored, especially Lisa. The bar was close to where they'd find my body, along the alley they needed to pass. As they got closer, my excitement grew. Just as they were about to turn the corner, Lisa suddenly squatted down. Her eyes welled up with tears, and her lips trembled like she was in intense pain. Uh, Mr. Smith, my stomach really hurts. My dad quickly knelt down, worried. What's wrong? I'll carry you to the hospital. He hoisted Lisa onto his back and briskly exited the alley, lying on his back. Lisa smirked with a sly expression, her arrogant demeanor just like back when she whispered in my ear, Joe, I'm going to take everything from you. I almost felt like laughing. It seemed Lisa knew my corpse was just 50 meters away. Still as wicked as ever, even in death, she was showing off in front of me. This reminded me of the past when she'd always find excuses to get my parents' attention. On my birthdays, they'd fuss over her while I watched. I no longer looked forward to my birthdays. I knew I'd end up alone with a cake until dawn. Eventually, my parents stopped caring too. They'd just hand me $100 on the day, go have tea with your friends. But for Lisa's birthday, they'd start preparing a week in advance. The house would be decorated with balloons, and they'd bake a huge cake for her. Lisa would invite reporters over to show off their kindness. After my birthday was taken, Lisa then took over my children's day, my graduation, Christmas, every event my parents could have spent with me. Thinking of this, my spirit drifted back to my body. I examined it closely. Bruised and twisted from torture, it looked like a rag doll. Dried blood caked my frame, painting a gruesome picture. I pressed my lips together. Surely I was miserable enough now. Surely Lisa can't take away my funeral, right? Once out of the alley, Lisa clung to my dad's neck. Mr. Smith, my stomach doesn't hurt anymore. Let's go home. My mom touched her forehead. Silly child, don't bear the pain. If you need to go to the hospital, just go. Don't save our money. Lisa pouted. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Meeting you has been the luckiest thing in my life. Her words brought tears to my parents' eyes. Back home, Dad gingerly set Lisa on the couch. Seeing the empty dining table, he exploded with anger. What's wrong with Joe? Too lazy even to make dinner? Mom sighed. It's not just dinner. The laundry and cleaning haven't been done either. I've never seen such a lazy child. What happened to her? In the past, I would have shouted, why me? Why doesn't Lisa do it? She needs to study and I don't. Whenever I said that, Dad's hands would tremble with anger. Joe, your grade's better than Lisa's. Think you're superior just because you're in a top school. Mom's eyes reddened, chiming in. Joe, your heart's made of stone. Can't you see Lisa needs more time to study to get good grades? Thinking of this, a sarcastic smile crept up my face. Back then, Lisa moved into my house in her first year of high school, claiming the dorm hampered her studying. She then insisted she needed my sunlit room, even made me clean her room, wash her laundry, even her underwear, all to not hinder her studies. But only I knew her grades were photoshopped. A classmate told me Lisa's scores were terrible, though her report card always came back nearly perfect. At times, on the brink of madness, I'd call Lisa a fraud. She'd cry, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Joe doesn't like me, let me leave. I'd rather be beaten to death by my crazy dad than upset Joe. Each time my parents would unleash their fury on me. Even when I captured proof of Lisa faking her report card, they only believed Lisa's tears. Eventually, I realized it wasn't that they didn't believe me, but they didn't want their perfect fantasy shattered. At least I no longer need to prove myself. I'm just a corpse now, aren't I? Just then, Dad's phone rang. The call was from the bar manager. Hey, is this Mr. Smith? It's the manager from the bar. Why didn't Joe come to work today? Already fuming, Dad lost it, yelling at the manager before hanging up. Mom came out with 2 plates of dumplings. Calm down, I'll call her. Dad scoffed. What for? I've never seen such a thoughtless child disappear without telling her parents. Just then, Lisa approached. Maybe she's at her boyfriend's. Sorry, I'm just guessing, Mr. Smith said. Dad turned to Lisa. Tell me what's going on. Lisa hesitated. Please don't tell her I said this. I once saw Joe kissing some old guy by a fancy car. Do you think Joe's selling herself for money? She's always been vain and gets mad if you buy me stuff. Her words ignited Dad's rage. He grabbed his phone to call me. Watching this, I laughed. He'd never get through. My phone was shattered by the devil. Seeing he couldn't reach me, he grabbed his coat, ready to search for me. For he shouted angrily, "If I find Joe tonight, I'll break her damn legs." Lisa quickly said, "Mr. Smith, don't go out. You haven't even had dinner. Joe used to run out in the middle of the night all the time. She'll be fine and will definitely come back soon." Dad's anger deepened at Lisa's words. He threw his clothes on the couch, trembling with rage. "Forget looking for her." "I'd rather she was dead out there." I raised an eyebrow. "Aren't I dead out there already?" I didn't want to hear my parents yell at me anymore. I returned to where my body lay. I gently touched each wound on my body. "It hurts, doesn't it?" "Like being sliced and slashed." "It hurts me too. Let's have different parents next life." Okay, as soon as I said that, tears of blood slipped down my cheeks, spilling onto my battered head, creating white ripples. Oh, that's my brain matter. The night gradually faded, and golden sunlight filled the alley. Early risers, a sanitation worker discovered my body. Horrified, they screamed several times and called the police in distress. The cops arrived quickly, roping off the scene. A crowd gathered, eager to see the spectacle. I felt like an observer watching people gesture at my body animatedly. Then I saw my parents standing at the back of the crowd. They were whispering, looking at me covered in a white sheet. This girl must have been up to no good, out late at night. No wonder something terrible happened to her. Exactly. Clearly her parents didn't raise her right. I nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, my parents never taught me. They were too busy teaching other girls. As soon as my parents got home, Lisa rushed over. "Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, did you find Joe?" Dad, still fuming, said, "Don't even talk about it. We passed by a crime scene. The police had the place roped off." Mom added, "Lisa, don't go out at night." "And Joe? Wait till I get my hands on her." "And Joe? Wait till I get my hands on her. She's always out causing trouble. She'll end up like that dead girl one day." Suddenly, Dad pulled out an admission ticket from his pocket. "Almost forgot we can check the college entrance exam results today." Lisa looked panicked. "Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, maybe I should check mine back at school." Dad cheerfully sat down at the computer. "You've worked so hard these past 3 years. Your grades won't be bad, don't worry." Ignoring Lisa's protests, Dad entered her exam number. When they saw the red number, 287, both froze. Lisa began to sob. "Oh no! How could I have done so poorly?" Lisa slapped herself. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith. I got my period during the exam and blacked out from the pain." Dad stammered, "Lisa, it's okay. We can repeat the year if needed." Mom nodded. Yes, we can always repeat the year. Don't worry." But Lisa was inconsolable, hitting herself again, seeing her panic. Mom grabbed Lisa's wrist. "Lisa, stop crying. Joe probably didn't do as well as you." Dad, flustered, tried to reassure. "Right, let's check Joe's score." "She hasn't been studying. She might not even hit 200 points." I sat on the computer desk, swinging my legs and taunted. "Go ahead, there might be a surprise." To prove how bad my score would be, Dad immediately sat at the computer and typed in my number. When the score 689 appeared, all three were stunned. Mom jumped up. "How did Joe score this high?" Dad shook. "She must have cheated. I'll ask her school how she managed to do that." I chuckled. "Go ahead, ask around. I've always been the top student. Let's see who I could possibly be copying from." Right then, there was a knock at the door. My parents opened it to find a police officer, who looked at them with deep regret. "Joe's parents, I'm sorry to inform you, your daughter was murdered last night at 9 p.m. "What did you say?" Mom's voice shrieked. The officer repeated, "She was raped and murdered behind the bar last night." Mom's body trembled violently, and a sharp, piercing wail escaped her throat, half swallowed by grief. Dad held onto the wall for support, his face twitching uncontrollably with shock. Tears fell from Mom's face, accompanied by her quivering form. In the cold morgue, my body was covered in a white sheet. Trembling, Mom approached, fingers shaking as she pulled back the sheet. My crushed face appeared bruised and slashed, like something out of a nightmare. Mom stared at me in horror, sweat beading on her forehead, her face quaking with dread. She. Your daughter showed signs of sexual assault and 72 soft tissue injuries. Her head was smashed with a brick 28 times. Mom clutched the officer's hand, veins bulging from the effort. How can you be sure this is my daughter? She doesn't look like this. I followed her gaze to my own face. Yeah, it really doesn't look like me now. The pain at my time of death was unbearable. My face was distorted and terrifying, with a twisted and rigid smile. Half of my head was caved in, and the eyeball from my remaining eye was bulging out. The cop sympathetically patted her hand. I know this is hard for you to accept. We've done a DNA test. She's indeed your daughter. My mom broke down, wailing hysterically. That can't be my daughter. My daughter was so obedient and well-behaved. How could she be so cruelly murdered? I heard her words and laughed. Obedient and well-behaved? They always said I was selfish and lacked empathy, that I wasn't on the right path. Funny how now that I'm dead, she's calling me obedient. How ironic. At that moment, my dad arrived at the morgue, supported by Lisa. He had the same reaction as my mom upon seeing my body. His fingers trembled. Officer? The cop quickly steadied him. Please, stay calm. I only have one daughter. My daughter. My dad's voice was raspy and mournful, much like a heartbroken father who had lost his child. Mr. Smith, don't worry. We'll do everything we can to catch the murderer. I need to ask, did your daughter call Mrs. Smith before she died? Did she say anything? From our investigation, she was likely with the killer then. The cop's words left them both in shock. My mom, with her neck stiff, couldn't swallow her sobs. She must have remembered that call where I asked her not to fuss over a newly bought dress. My dad, shivering and tearful, silently sobbing, remembered the interview with reporters, urging my mom to hang up. In the dead silence, my dad suddenly collapsed backward, his eyes wide open. I kind of wish the cop knew that my parents ignored their daughter's cry for help because they were taking an 18-year-old kid from the mountains to the hospital for an STD. When my dad came around, it was already night. I watched from the window as Lisa comforted my parents. My dad, trembling, said, Lisa, thank you. Without you, I don't know how I'd get through this. Lisa shook her head. Mr. Smith, don't worry. Even though Joe is gone, I'll always be your daughter. Tears streamed down my dad's face as he tightly held Lisa's hand. My mom looked at Lisa appreciatively. It's so nice to have you, Lisa. I watched the three of them, together in their comforting scene, a mocking grin on my lips. Wonder what happens when my parents find out who's responsible for my death. Will they still be thankful to Lisa? Being a criminal case meant my story got a lot of attention, not just local news, but entertainment news and media folks all wanted in on the scoop. I watched my parents appear on camera again, holding their heads high. See, I can get my parents on the news too, right? Lisa worked to make them quickly forget about me, bringing in all those kids my parents sponsored. Right, Lisa worked to make them quickly forget about me, bringing in all those kids my parents sponsored. They laughed and cried with my parents. Watching my home busier than when I was alive, I nodded with satisfaction. Perfect, losing their real daughter replaced by so many other kids. Lisa even reached out to reporters to share all the good deeds my parents did over the years. The reporters got all excited. They had my parents pose with the kids they supported, showing gratitude. With Lisa's help, in just a few days, my parents forgot their grief and dove back into their charity work. Even when the police called about updates on my case, they brushed it off, saying they were too busy to talk. Until one day, Lisa and some kids from her village took my parents to a real estate agency. I laughed until tears rolled down my face. It was Lisa's endgame to squeeze the last penny out of my family. Lisa and the kids knelt in front of my parents, crying, Joe is gone, but we'll all take care of you. I'm going abroad for college. It costs a lot, but I promise I'll make loads of money to support you. Because Lisa's grades couldn't get her into a public university here, she refused to retake the year, so she planned to study overseas. To afford it, my parents sold their only house at a low price, giving the money to Lisa and the kids they supported. Lisa knew my parents well. She called in a bunch of reporters that day. On stage, under all the cameras and flashes, my parents looked excited. In no time, their charity was all over the media again. Once in a while, someone online would wonder, isn't it weird their daughter died? And they moved on so fast. Watching them, I wasn't surprised at all. This was my family. Love shone under the spotlight, gone once it was off. While my parents basked in media glory, Lisa took the money from the house and with the kids, partied at a club, gulping $1,000 champagne and munching on $100 fruit platters. Even my killer was living it up with a slice of that money, mocking my parents' stupidity, taunting them for being fake and clueless. Seeing them all happy gave me a twisted sense of joy, almost bringing me to tears again. Only when the police arrested the murderer did my parents have no choice but to visit the station. As soon as they arrived, my dad grabbed the cop's hand. "Officer, I have important matters. I trust you with my daughter's case." The cop's brows shot up. "What are you talking about?" The cop's brows furrowed. "Your daughter's death was brutal. We've been staying up all night trying to bring the criminal to justice. Yet, when we ask you to come in for questioning, you don't bother showing up. What could possibly be more important than your own daughter's case?" Just then, Lisa stepped in front of my mom and dad. "Officer, don't blame them. They've been helping other kids in need these past few days." The cop smirked. "All right, fine. In that case, all of you come with me to the interrogation room." I couldn't even bear to look at those three, so I drifted over to the interrogation room. Inside sat Lisa's biological dad. Seeing the man brought back memories of that night, pain, humiliation flooding my mind. I clenched my fists, wanting nothing more than to tear him apart. The cop slammed the table. "Why did you kill Joe?" The handcuffed man had spit dribbling from his lips, looking deranged. "She was my wife." The cop's anger erupted as he tossed a psychological evaluation report in front of the man. "Stop pretending." "You're not mentally ill." The man couldn't keep up the act, wiping away his twisted smile, and instead let out a creepy chuckle. "You might want to ask my daughter about that. She said Joe was a nuisance, and I could do whatever I wanted. Without her help, I might not have managed it." "Officer, it's not all my fault." That familiar grin sent shivers down my spine. "That's the face he had when he raped me." My parents had been helping Lisa in the first place because they thought her dad was mentally ill and had a tragic past. What would happen if my parents knew the truth? Or if reporters found out? Thinking about it made me excited. I floated to the police station lobby, bustling now with commotion. My mom's fingers trembled as she spoke. "Lisa, how could you do this? We supported you, even sold our house to send you abroad, and this is how you repay us." "Your dad killed my daughter." Lisa dropped to her knees, pleading. "Mom, I didn't know. I never thought he'd do something like this. He's mentally ill. He wasn't thinking." My dad pushed Lisa aside. "The police said your dad's not mentally ill. You and he have been lying to us from the start." "Oh, someone tell me. How could you be so cruel?" Lisa, realizing she couldn't keep up her act, stood up. For the first time, she showed her true colors in front of everyone. "Why are you yelling at me? What have you got to do with me, you old witch?" My mom looked at Lisa, shocked. "Are you even human? After all we've done for you? What did you just call me? Where's your conscience?" Lisa laughed hysterically. "You helped me? Without reporters, would you have done that? Cut the fake charity act. Joe's barely been gone, and you're so quick to paint yourselves as saints online. I'm disgusted for Joe having had you two as parents. I'm disgusted for Joe having had you two as parents. Oh yeah, one more thing. If you hadn't threatened to stop funding me if I didn't get into college, my dad might not have done what he did to your daughter. Even a tiger won't eat its own cub, yet you caused your own daughter's death." Well, things came out sooner than I thought. I figured the cops wouldn't find out until I made it abroad. Hearing Lisa's words, my parents broke down completely. Maybe what hurt them the most wasn't my death. It was realizing that all the help and support they gave was a joke. I watched as they clung to each other crying, feeling nothing. And then the scene was uploaded online by waiting reporters. My parents became famous again, but this time for all the wrong reasons. Online, people tore them apart, calling them heartless for ignoring their own daughter's murder. Some said my parents were naive, fooled for over a decade. Others bashed Lisa as a heartless con artist, exploiting sympathy to rake in money. Reporters, eager for more, swarmed my house. But all they caught were shots of my parents refusing to leave the house they had sold, branded as freeloaders. Turns out, after Lisa was arrested and my parents got home, the new owner showed up. That was when reality hit them. Their one house was gone, sold because of Lisa's manipulations. They clung to it, refusing to leave, until the new owner came at them with a kitchen knife. Of course, the reporters captured the whole mess, plastering it online. My parents, already humiliated, now had a new nickname: freeloaders. Watching my dad transform from a respected figure to a scorned joke gave me a sense of satisfaction. See, when you let vanity blind you, it's only a matter of time before it backfires. In the end, Lisa got 20 years for aiding and murder, and her dad received the death penalty. My dad couldn't handle the online ridicule and collapsed in their rented apartment, left paralyzed. If not for the diligent cops recovering their house money, they wouldn't even afford medical bills. In the hospital, my dad lay on a bed emitting a foul smell, helpless to do anything, even use the bathroom alone. Meanwhile, my mom struggled in the hospital lobby, unable to use her phone, taking half an hour just to book an appointment. My dad looked around at the other patients, surrounded by their kids providing care. He lay there, utterly alone, lacking even a single helping hand. Tears and snot smeared his face as he cried. After a week, he returned home. Unable to buy a new house, they rented a cheap place, scraping by on the money retrieved from selling the house, that is, until it ran out due to medical expenses. In the end, the two had nothing but welfare checks to survive on. 7, my mom, being older, had to look after someone who was half paralyzed. One day she messed up her back and couldn't get up anymore. That day, she bawled her eyes out. "If only Joe were still here," she lamented. Back then, Joe's grades were stellar. Ugh. "If it wasn't for you," she snapped. "You always freeze up when reporters show up." Would I have treated our own daughter like that? My dad was there too, sobbing rigidly. Maybe he wanted to argue, but he couldn't speak anymore. All he could do was cry, and now he smelled terrible. Seeing them in such a pitiable state, I felt no sympathy for them. I figured it was time for me to bail. If there's a next life, I hope God doesn't make me their kid again. The end. Once, when I was dragged into the alley, my parents were hugging the child they were sponsoring, happily chatting with the reporters. Watching her grow up like any normal kid was the happiest thing for us as a couple. Everyone was praising how generous and kind they were. Seeing my mom and dad soaking up the happiness and fame, I was happy for them too. That is, if I wasn't being left for dead in the wilderness right now. My body felt like a filthy rag, tossed to the ground by the man. He yanked my hair, slamming my head brutally into the pavement. Blood instantly stained my eyes and forehead, and the intense pain made my body curl up, stretch out, and curl again. I mustered all my strength and, in a last burst of sanity, pressed the emergency contact button. The man noticed what I did, grinning a horrifying, mad grin. He crawled over me, tauntingly held the phone in front of my face as he bit into my neck with his foul-smelling mouth. His rough hand tore my jacket and crept under my skirt. The emergency call connected, and I heard my mom's voice, annoyed through the phone. "Joe, can you stop causing trouble? Today's interview with the kids from the mountains is important, and Lisa is the focus. Why do you have a problem with the new dress I bought her? Lisa's sick. Even the reporters changed the location. How can you be so heartless, selfish, and petty, making a fuss endlessly over a dress?" Her complaints completely drowned out my muffled pleas for help until I heard a girl's voice on the line. "Mrs. Smith, please don't be mad at Joe. She's not as good at school as I am, and she doesn't have reporters following her around. I bet she feels bad. Lisa doesn't speak up for her. She's just spoiled and hasn't had any hardships. Mrs. Smith, I don't want you and Joe to have a falling out over me. Lisa, dear, you're just too understanding." The call ended with a click, the dial tone sounding like a death toll. The man threw my phone, smashing it to pieces, crushing my last shred of hope. Hate filled my chest. I hated that I trusted them enough to put them as emergency contacts. I hated knowing that every child my parents sponsored was more important than me. Yet I still had hope for them. The night dragged on, Each second felt like a painful slice on my body. I don't know when the man stopped, but he picked up a brick from the road. He looked at me, a broken rag doll, and laughed hysterically. He brought the brick down on my head. The pain surged through my organs, the metallic taste of salt and iron filling my mouth. I gasped for breath like a stray dog in the scorching heat. My chest shuddered and trembled. Until the brick struck my head the second time, the third. The night was terrifyingly dark and I couldn't feel the pain anymore. Only the cold blood and tears on my face stung my skin. My soul drifted up above. I saw my body exposed, bruised all over, my head a bloody mess. In a twisted way, I curled my lips. I wondered if my parents saw me like this. Would they still think other kids were more pitiful than me? Fresh blood tears streaked my face again, and my soul was yanked forcefully into a hospital. In the ward, reporters had already left. My mom was hugging a girl, looking about my age. She was 18, wearing a white dress I had in my shopping cart for months, which my mom never would buy for me. I gently wiped the blood tear from the corner of my eye. Just then, my dad walked into the room. He was carrying 2 boxes of milk, carefully heating them with hot water, tearing them open, pouring them into a cup, and holding it to Lisa's mouth. It's hot. Drink it carefully. When you're sick and have a fever, you need to eat something. Such fatherly love, which I once had. When did my dad stop taking care of me with such attention? Oh, I remember. It was the day he first met Lisa. My parents had taken me to volunteer, thinking I needed to learn about hardship. Since Lisa's dad was mentally ill and her mom had passed, on the way there, they kept telling me to be nice to Lisa, not to bully her. When we reached Lisa's house, looking at the barren walls, seeing Lisa's small and pale figure standing in the middle of the rundown house, and especially noticing her wearing sandals in below freezing weather, it hit me hard. I immediately took off my down jacket and gave it to her, even though I was cold too. After we got home, Lisa would write letters to my mom every few days, childish words full of longing for my parents. Each time she wrote, my mom would send her money. I didn't think much of it back then. I even bragged to my classmates and friends about how good people my parents were, but I started noticing the changes. I didn't get new clothes anymore because Lisa needed them more. My toys were gone because Lisa needed school supplies. I cried. I made a scene. My dad scolded me for being selfish, for lacking empathy. But I never understood. Lisa's misfortune wasn't my fault, so why did I have to suffer for her to be happy? By the time I graduated elementary school, Lisa got into the best middle school in our county. The local news picked up her story, and my parents, the kind-hearted sponsors for her education and life, were highlighted in Lisa's praises. Reporters swarmed our house, interviewing my parents, taking pictures and videos. My parents became local celebrities, getting greetings everywhere, extra fruit at the market. Sometimes community workers would visit, thanking them profusely. Their personal accounts even gained 30,000 followers that month because of all the media coverage. Every day, fans left comments praising their great generosity. They commended them for their noble and helpful nature. My mom and dad became known as kind-hearted people, both online and offline, thanks to all that admiration. And Lisa, ever the dutiful daughter, went ahead and introduced several poor kids from her village to them, fulfilling their wishes. In time, my parents took on the living and school expenses for nearly all the children in Lisa's village. Lisa didn't forget to repay them for their kindness. She and the village kids appeared on TV, crying to reporters while praising my parents' big hearts. Even the county recognized them with several banners of honor. Caught in the whirlwind of compliments, my parents smiled more often. Even after selling almost all our houses, leaving just one old and shabby place, they were okay. Even when we couldn't afford fresh veggies and had to collect leftovers from vendors, they still found joy in it all. I didn't realize the extent of it until my grandma fell ill and my dad had spent all of her savings. She passed away without receiving medical treatment because we couldn't afford it. I was furious, and I stormed off to Lisa's village. "Do you realize," I yelled at her, "because of you and these kids, my grandma's gone forever." This girl, who was always so humble in front of others, finally showed her true colors, smiling brightly. "Is that my fault?" I asked. "Your parents were just foolish." I couldn't hold back. I slapped her. That slap enraged Lisa, sparking her need for revenge. She started getting closer to my parents, swearing she'd take everything from me. When I came home that day, my dad returned the slap. Joe, how did I raise such a selfish, ungrateful person? I helped those kids out of kindness. Your grandma was old. No matter the treatment, she wouldn't have lived long. Do you understand? You were wicked enough to hit Lisa. I stared at my father in disbelief. Did their plight justify letting my grandma die? Lisa, feeling victorious, called me after it all. Joe, get on your knees and beg. I'll slowly return your parents to you. As I thought about the past, a bitter, sharp pain gripped my chest. My head ached. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it felt like I'd forgotten so much, like my love for my parents. Suddenly, I jumped onto another hospital bed, swinging my legs, watching a happy family scene. Just then, a doctor came in, and my dad nervously stood up. Nurse, she only had a fever. Why is it a wart issue? The doctor glanced at him. Maybe advise your daughter on fewer boyfriends and give her a bit of sex education. As the doctor left, my parents, alarmed, stood up. Lisa, what does that mean? How do you have a boyfriend? Lisa broke down, sobbing hysterically. Auntie, I was forced. At school, there's a gang picking on good students. If I didn't comply, they'd beat me and lock me in the bathroom every day. My dad tensed and turned sharply to my mom. See what you did? Lisa's going through school bullying. We need to talk to the school about this. My mom, heart aching, hugged the girl. Lisa, why didn't you tell me? I would have helped. Meanwhile, I was bored to tears, ready to fall asleep. School bullying? Only my parents would buy Lisa's nonsense. Once passing Lisa's school, I saw her smoking with a tattooed boy, bullying a glasses-wearing kid. I came home and told my mom that Lisa was squandering their money, smoking, drinking, dating, and bullying others. My mom didn't believe me and called me spiteful and jealous. Lisa always seemed so well-behaved. How could she be anything but? That's when my parents no longer trusted a word I said. Every child they helped came from tragic backgrounds, but was better than me, more diligent and more virtuous. I wondered why, even as their own, I couldn't compare to these outsiders. Maybe because their biological child didn't bring them honor and applause. Lisa finished with her 4th year, was carefully escorted home by my parents. On the way, my mom suddenly suggested, "Why don't we pick up that wayward daughter of ours? It's her off time." My dad frowned. "That wayward child works at a bar. I should break her legs, not pick her up." Lisa smiled sweetly. "Come on, Mr. Smith, no grudges between you guys. Joe's curious, always trying new things. She's just a bit naive now." Lisa's words instantly cheered my parents up. My mom playfully tapped Lisa's nose. "You're such a smart cookie. Always know how to make him happy. If only Joe were as sensible as you." Seeing them head towards my bar job, I got excited. After high school, I worked in a bar to save for college expenses. Though chaotic, it paid well. My parents needed their money for their sponsored kids, especially Lisa. The bar was near where I died. They had to pass by that alley. As they neared, my anticipation grew, but just as they rounded the corner, Lisa suddenly crouched down. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and her lips quivered like she was in unbearable pain. "Mr. Smith, my stomach hurts." "Hurts?" My dad quickly squatted down, worried. "What's wrong? Let me carry you to the hospital." He lifted Lisa onto his back and hurried out of the alley. Lisa, lying on his back, smirked defiantly. She looked just like she did when she used to whisper in my ear, "Joe, I'll take everything from you." I almost wanted to laugh. Seems like Lisa knew my lifeless body was just 50 meters away, still as cruel as ever. Even now, she can't help but show off in front of me. I remembered the past, how Lisa used to make up excuses to get my parents' attention on my birthdays, leaving me alone with my cake till dawn. Over time, my parents stopped caring too. They'd just slip me $100 on my birthday, saying, "Go have some tea with your friends." But when it was Lisa's birthday, they'd start preparing a week in advance, decorating the house with balloons and baking her a huge cake. Lisa would always invite reporters, showcasing their kindness. After stealing my birthday, she took my childhood, graduation, Christmas, every moment with my parents. Thinking about it, I drifted back to my body. I looked at my twisted, tortured form, blood dried on my skin. A terrifying, pitiful sight. I bit my lip. Guess I'm miserable enough now. Lisa can't take my funeral, can she? Once out of the alley, Lisa clung to my dad's neck. "Mr. Smith, my stomach doesn't hurt anymore. Let's go home." My mom touched Lisa's forehead. Silly girl, don't hide your illness. Go to the hospital if you need to. Don't save money for Mrs. Smith. Lisa pouted. Mrs. Smith, thank you. Meeting you guys is the luckiest thing in my life. Her words made my parents tear up with emotion. Back home, my dad gently placed Lisa on the sofa. Seeing the empty dinner table, he burst out in anger. Where is Jo? She can't even cook dinner? My mom sighed. Not just dinner. There are clothes unwashed and the house isn't clean. I've never seen such a lazy girl. How did she end up like this? In the past, I'd angrily shout back, Why me? Why doesn't Lisa do it? Just because she studies doesn't mean I don't. Every time I said that, my dad would shake his finger at me. Jo, are your grades better than Lisa's? Just because you're in a good school doesn't make you better. My mom's eyes would redden. Jo, are you heartless? How can you be so unsympathetic? Lisa's school isn't as good. She needs more time to study for good grades. I smirked at the memory. When Lisa started high school, she moved in, claiming her dorm affected her studies. She even snatched my sunny room, saying the same. Later, she had me clean her room and even wash her clothes, but I knew her grades were all faked. I had classmates in her class, and they'd tell me Lisa did poorly, yet she'd bring home near-perfect report cards. When pushed to the edge, I'd call her a fraud, and she'd cry, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, Jo hates me. Just let me go. Even if my crazy dad beats me, I don't want to upset Jo. My parents would always get mad at me then, no matter if I had proof of her faked grades. They only believed Lisa's tears. Eventually, I understood. It wasn't that they didn't believe me. They didn't want to wake from their dream of praise. At least I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I'm just a corpse now, right? Just then, my dad's phone rang. It was the bar manager. Hello, Mr. Smith. This is the bar manager. Why didn't Jo come to work today? Already enraged, my dad grew more furious, scolding the manager before hanging up. My mom came with dumplings. Calm down, I'll call her, Dad scoffed. Why call her? I've never seen such an inconsiderate child. She left without a word. Lisa approached. Maybe Jo went to her boyfriend's? Sorry, Mr. Smith, I'm just guessing. Dad turned to Lisa. Tell me what's going on. Biting her lip, Lisa murmured, Mr. Smith, you didn't hear this from me, but I saw Jo kissing some older guy by a fancy car. You think Jo sold herself for money? She's always been vain, mad whenever you bought me something. Lisa's words ignited my dad's anger. He grabbed his phone to call me. I smiled watching him. My phone would never ring again. It's been smashed to bits by a devil. Seeing the call failed, my dad grabbed his coat to search for me. For he roared in anger. If I find Jo tonight, I swear I'll break her damn legs. Lisa quickly interjected. Mr. Smith, don't go out. You haven't even had dinner. Jo often wanders out late at night. She'll be fine and will definitely come back soon. Lisa's words only fueled my dad's anger. He tossed his coat onto the sofa, trembling with fury. Forget finding her. It's better if she dies out there. I raised my eyebrows. Wasn't I just dead outside? I didn't want to watch my parents insult me anymore. I went back to my body, touching every wound on my corpse. You're hurting, right? Like being slashed by knives. It must be. My heart hurts too. Let's not have such self-righteous parents in our next life, okay? As soon as I finished speaking, blood tears rolled down my cheeks, splashing onto my battered head, creating white ripples. Oh, that was my brain. The night faded away as the morning light, golden and bright, poured into the alley. A street cleaner out in the morning found my body screaming in terror a few times. He dialed the emergency number with pity. The cops arrived quickly, cordoning off the area with red tape. A crowd gathered, curious onlookers pointing and gossiping about my body. I watched them like a spectator, intrigued by their reactions. Then I saw my parents standing behind the crowd. They whispered to each other while looking at my body, covered by a white sheet. This girl must have been troubled, out late at night, one said. It's her own fault, said another. Yeah, clearly her parents didn't raise her right, echoed another. I nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. My parents didn't raise me. They were teaching some other girl, never me. As my parents returned home, Lisa hurried up to them. Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, did you find Joe? My dad's chest heaved with frustration. Don't ask. We stumbled upon a murder scene on the way. The police had it taped off. My mom chimed in, Lisa, don't go out at night, and Joe, if I find her, I'll give her a piece of my mind. Always out fooling around. She'll end up like that girl who was killed. My mom's words had barely left her mouth when my dad suddenly pulled out an exam ticket from his pocket. I almost forgot. We can check the college entrance exam scores today. Lisa looked a bit panicked. Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, maybe I should go back to school to check. My dad sat down in front of the computer happily. You've worked so hard in high school. Your results will be great, don't worry. Ignoring Lisa's protests, he entered the exam number. When the number 287 appeared, they were stunned. Lisa began to sob. Why did I do so poorly? She cried, slapping herself. Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, I'm so sorry. I had cramps during the test, thought I could tough it out, but I fainted. My dad's lips trembled. Lisa's okay, we can always redo it next year. My mom nodded, trembling. Yes, we can redo it. There's no need to rush. But Lisa, not listening, slapped herself again. Watching Lisa's anxiety and pain, my mom grabbed her wrist. Lisa, don't cry. Joe probably did worse than you. My dad panicked. Come to his senses, right? Let's check Joe's score. She never studies. Bet she didn't even hit 200. I swung my legs, perched on the computer, and grinned. Check it out. Maybe there'll be a surprise to prove my poor performance. My dad quickly sat down and punched in my exam ticket number. When the score 689 popped up, all three were speechless. My mom stood up in shock. Joe did so well, my dad stammered. She must have cheated. Wait, I'm going to ask her teachers how they let her cheat. I watched them, amused. Go ahead, ask. I've always been top of the class. Just see who let me cheat on every single exam. Just then, a knock at the door interrupted them. My parents opened it to find a police officer looking regretful. Mr. and Mrs. Joe, I'm sorry to inform you. Your daughter was murdered last night at 9 p.m. What did you say? My mom's voice was sharp. The officer repeated, She was raped and killed in the alley behind the bar last night. My mom's body shook violently, the wailing cries stifled in her throat. My dad leaned against the wall, his facial muscles twitching uncontrollably with shock. Suddenly, tears fell from my mom's cheeks. Along with them came her trembling convulsions. In the cold morgue, my body lay beneath a white sheet. Trembling, my mom walked to my bedside. Her shaking fingers peeled back the sheet over me. My smashed head showed through. The bruises and dried blood on my face made me look like a demon from hell. Horror filled my mother's eyes, sweat beading her forehead, her face twitching in shock. She, your daughter, was assaulted before her death with 72 soft tissue injuries, and her head was struck 28 times with a brick, said the officer. My mom gripped the officer's hand fiercely, her veins bulging. How? How can you be sure she's my daughter? My daughter doesn't look like that. She pointed to my face. Her voice was dry and raspy. I followed her gaze to my face. Yeah, I do look different, don't I? A 5-year-old dying was so painful. My face looked twisted and terrifying with a smile that was warped and stuck. Half of my head was crushed, and my eye that wasn't sunken was bulging out. The cop sympathetically patted her hand. I know it's hard to accept, but we've done a DNA test. She's your daughter. My mom broke down, sobbing hysterically. How could this be my daughter? My daughter was so obedient and well-behaved. How could anyone murder her like this? Hearing her words, I couldn't help but laugh. Obedient and well-behaved? They always said I was selfish, said I had no empathy, said I wouldn't amount to much. Funny how in death, she suddenly painted me as this perfect child. It's ridiculous. Just then, my dad walked into the morgue with Lisa's help. Seeing my body, he reacted just like Mom. His fingers trembled. She, he stammered. Officer, he stalled. The cop quickly supported him. Please try to stay calm. I only had one daughter, my daughter. My dad's voice was hoarse and mournful, sounding exactly like a father deeply in pain over losing his child. Mr. Smith, don't worry. We'll do our best to find who did this. Can I ask, did your daughter call Mrs. Smith before she left us? What did she say? The officer's words left them both stunned. She must have remembered the call. She told me not to pester her about a new dress. Dad's body shook, weeping silently. He likely remembered hurrying my mom to end the call because of a reporter's interview. A deadly silence settled. Suddenly, Dad fell back stiffly, eyes wide and round. I felt a bit of pity, wishing the cop knew. My parents ignored their own daughter's cry for help because they were taking kids from the mountains for STD checkups at the hospital. When Dad woke up again, it was night already. I sat on the windowsill, watching Lisa comfort my parents. Dad's fingers shook. Lisa, thank you. Without you, I couldn't get through this. Lisa shook her head. Mr. Smith, don't worry. Even with Joe gone, I'll always be your daughter. My dad broke down in tears again, holding Lisa's hand tightly. Mom looked at Lisa gratefully. It's so good to have you, Lisa. I watched their usual warm display with a mocking smile. I wondered if they'd still be grateful to Lisa once they found out who killed me. Because of the criminal case, my situation got a lot of attention. It wasn't just covered in local news. Gossip columns and online media were quick to report it too. I watched my parents on camera again, proud, chest out. See, I'm capable of getting my parents on the news too, aren't I? Lisa, trying to help them get over me, brought every child my parents sponsored to our house. They cried and laughed with them. I nodded, satisfied to see my house more lively than when I was alive. That's great. Lose one daughter and gain a bunch more. Lisa reached out to the reporters, telling them of all my parents' good deeds over the years. The reporters were even more eager. They had my parents pose with their sponsored kids, showcasing their gratitude. Thanks to Lisa's efforts, within days, my parents forgot their pain and dove back into their charity work. Even when the police called a few times to update them on my case, they turned it down, saying they were too busy. Then, one day, I saw Lisa and the kids from her village take my parents to a real estate office. I laughed until I cried. So, Lisa's plan all along was to drain every penny from my family. Lisa and the kids kneeled before my parents, crying. Joe is gone, but we'll all take care of you. I need a lot of money for studying abroad, but I promise I'll earn lots later to support you. Since Lisa didn't score high enough for a public university at home and didn't want to study further, she decided to study abroad. To get the money, my parents sold their house for a low price, giving the money to Lisa and the kids they sponsored for years. Lisa knew my parents well enough to invite reporters that day too. On stage, with cameras flashing, my parents' face glowed with a unique joy. Once again, my parents' big hearts became the media's darling story. Once in a while, someone online would question, isn't it odd they moved on so quickly after losing their daughter? Seeing their behavior didn't surprise me. That's them, parents who thrive under the spotlight, with a home that vanishes when the lights go out. While my parents soaked in media attention, Lisa took my parents' house sale money. She and the other kids my parents sponsored partied in a bar, drinking overpriced liquor, eating expensive platters. Even my murderer had a share of that money, living it up without remorse. They laughed at my parents' ignorance, mocked their false righteousness, and called them fools. Watching them find their happiness brings me joy, even joyful enough to shed bloody tears. Not until the police caught the criminal did my parents reluctantly go to the station. As soon as he arrived, Dad clutched the officer's hand. Officer, I have important matters. I'm leaving my daughter's case in your capable hands. The cop instantly furrowed his brow. What are you so relieved about? Your daughter died in such a horrible way, and we cops have been staying up night after night to bring the criminal to justice. But you? We called you into the station to give a statement several times and you never showed up. What could be more important than your daughter's case? Right then, Lisa stepped in front of my mom and dad. Officer, please don't blame my parents. They've been trying to help other unfortunate kids all this time. The cop let out a cold laugh. Okay then. You all come with me to the interrogation room. I looked at the three of them, not even wanting to glance their way, and drifted into the interrogation room. There sat Lisa's real dad. Looking at the man before me, the pain and humiliation from that night flooded back into my mind. I clenched my fists tightly. I wanted nothing more than to tear this man apart. The cop slammed his hand on the table. Tell me, why did you kill Joe? The man, handcuffed with drool at the corner of his mouth, wore a sinister expression. She was my wife. The cop erupted in anger, throwing the psych evaluation in front of the man. Stop faking it. You're not mentally ill at all. Quit acting. Once the man realized he couldn't keep up the charade, he dropped the twisted expression and replaced it with a bizarre grin, chuckling. You might need to ask my daughter about that. She's the one who said Joe was in the way, and I could do whatever I wanted. Without her help, I might not have pulled it off. Officer, don't blame me for this. Seeing that familiar smile sent shivers down my spine. That was his expression the night he raped me. My parents initially supported Lisa because of her father's supposed mental illness and tragic past. If my parents learned the truth, if the reporters did, the thought made me restless. I drifted into the police station's lobby, crowded and bustling. My mom's hands trembled. Lisa, how could you? We funded your education, supported your life, even sold our house to send you abroad. And your father killed my daughter. Lisa kneeled, begging. Mom, I didn't know. I never thought my dad would do that. He's mentally ill. He doesn't have control. My dad pushed Lisa away. The police said it themselves. Your dad isn't mentally ill. You and your dad have been deceiving us from the start. God, can someone tell me why? How can you be so evil? Seeing that she couldn't keep pretending, Lisa stood up, finally showing her true colors in front of everyone. Why are you scolding me? What's your connection to me, you old witch? Mom stared at her in disbelief. Are you even human? How did we support you all these years? And now you call me that? Where's your conscience? Lisa laughed hysterically. Support me? If it wasn't for the media exposure, would you have supported me? Cut the fake kindness. Just days after Joe passed, you were happily showcasing online. I'm disgusted by parents like you. Oh, and by the way, if you hadn't threatened to stop my funding if I didn't get into college, my dad might not have done what he did to your daughter. Even a tiger won't harm its cubs, but you basically got your daughter killed. This whole thing blew up faster than I thought. I assumed I'd be abroad by the time the police found out. Hearing Lisa's words, my parents were completely shattered. Perhaps what stung the most wasn't my death, but realizing that their years of support had all been a joke. Looking at the two of them, supporting each other in tears, I felt nothing. Reporters had captured the whole scene and shared it online. My parents became infamous, but this time, not in a good way, but through harsh criticism. Online, people viciously attacked my parents, calling them heartless for ignoring their own daughter's death. Some said they were naive for being fooled for years. Others criticized Lisa, calling her heartless and saying she profited from her sob story. Reporters swarmed our house, eager for follow-up stories. But they only found my parents, labeled as deadbeats for squatting in the sold house. Turns out, after Lisa was jailed, the new homeowner came knocking. My parents snapped out of their delusion to realize they had already sold their only home under Lisa's persuasion. Refusing to move, they holed up in the house, causing the new landlord to threaten them with a knife. This incident was also captured by reporters and shared online, adding more shame to their name, deadbeat. Watching as my dad went from a well-respected man to a deadbeat, a hypocrite, blind to the truth, I felt overjoyed. See, when blinded by vanity, it will eventually backfire. In the end, Lisa got 20 years for inciting and aiding murder, while her dad got the death penalty. Overwhelmed by online abuse, my dad collapsed in the rented apartment and became paralyzed. Without the police recovering his house sale money, they'd have no funds for his treatment. In the hospital, my dad lay on the bed, reeking. Paralysis meant he couldn't even use the toilet on his own. Meanwhile, my mom fumbled around the hospital lobby, unable to use her phone, taking forever just to make an appointment. Lying there, my dad noticed other patients surrounded by family, being cared for and loved. But he lay there, alone, with no one to even clean his body. Tears and snot smeared across his trembling face as he cried. After a week in the hospital, they returned home. Unable to buy a house, they rented a cheap one. They barely survived on the recovered house sale money until medical expenses drained it all. In the end, they scraped by on welfare, just barely getting by. My mom, being old and having to take care of a paralyzed patient, finally threw out her back one day and couldn't get up anymore. That day she cried. She cried hysterically. If only Joe were still here at this time. Back then, Joe's grades were top notch. Ugh, if it weren't for you, really. When the reporters came, you didn't even know your own last name. Do you think I'd treat our real daughter this way? My dad also let out stiff sobs, probably wanting to argue back. But he couldn't speak anymore. All he could do was cry, making that awful smell come off him again. But as I looked at their miserable state, I couldn't find an ounce of sympathy for them. I figured it's time for me to go. If there's a next life, I hope fate doesn't make me their child again.